Start us off, Calum.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today we have an episode of Castpod Conservation.
There we
This
go.
time, see, I named it this time. This time we are dealing with captive stuff again, slightly, but also dealing with the differences between captive, wild, and also some middle ground stuff like tame and feral and things like that. So a lot
Things
of
that don't truly fit into one category.
Yeah, a lot of weird terminology for you there. But, there will be a quiz at the end, so make sure you pay attention. But for now, let's get into it. So what do these words mean, Kevin?
So let's start with wild animals because that's going to be the easiest to define.
Yeah, I think that everybody kind of knows about that.
It's an animal, you kind of go outside and you see it, and it's like not anyone's pet. It lives in the area and does its own thing.
Yeah, it's your basic definition of an animal, is one that lives outside and has not ever had like contact with humans in the areas of like we didn't help them reproduce or anything like that.
Yeah.
Like this is just an animal that's always been on its own for generations.
And arguably, it could never have interacted or even know humans exist.
Yeah.
Although we
Basically.
make that hard.
We do. It is very hard these days for animals to not have any interaction with people. But at least these wild animals are the ones that they don't really need us to survive. But then we get into some more slightly debatable topics, slightly confusing ones.
Let's start with the opposite end of the spectrum. So,
Well, yeah, but even these
yeah.
can be a bit confusing. But then we go into captive. So what's captive?
So captive is animals that can be from the wild or not from the wild, but they are under human care at some capacity, whether it be completely dependent on humans, with a term we'll bring up later, domestic animals, or whether it be humans just provide their basic needs. So they could be tame, they could be, or they could be just a captive wild animal.
So this could be a pet. It could be in a zoo.
It could be in a circus. It could be
any kind of animal that lives kind of inside or in an enclosure of some sort. And we feed them and take care of them in some fashion. So that's also pretty easy to understand. Although this is where we kind of get into the blurred lines of things where it's like, well, does an animal have to be domesticated or domestic to be a captive animal or
vice versa?
Yeah. But we'll get into that. Because then we have the middle ground stuff, which is tame or feral or something like that. So what do those words mean?
So, in my opinion, tame and feral mean opposite things.
I would agree with that.
So, tame is a typically wild or exotic animal that it's still on a genetic level the same thing as one you would find in a wild. However, its temperament in this situation, specifically towards people, is typically calm and not very reactive towards people.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of things such as ball pythons and exotic reptiles is kept as pets is a very good example of tamed animals. Even
like something that's trainable as well. Like you get like animals that come to people's like feeders in their backyard or people that feed wild animals and then they can just kind of chill with them and interact with them. Or like on some level kind of tame air quotes.
Yeah.
Even though they're still wild animals, so like don't just try to be buddies with your local bear or anything because you fed it a couple times.
Yeah.
But an animal that's more relaxed towards people due to a lot of interaction with people.
And a little bit of a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
Or maybe even parasitic, depending on who mooches off who.
That's true. Maybe not everybody's benefiting, but at least probably somebody is.
And
then feral.
Feral. Feral is a animal that is originally domestic, and it either gets out or escapes or is kicked out of whatever home it is living in.
Or just kind of left out there, and it eventually kind of just adapts to figuring out how to live on its own.
Or even reproduced in the wild with another one.
Yeah.
And it has very little interaction with humans. And thus has typically a negative relationship with humans.
Yeah. Feral's a pretty negative connotation, I'd say. But I think most people have probably heard of feral dogs, feral cats, feral hogs, even rarely feral children.
Yep.
Like Mowgli from the Jungle Book.
I thought you were going to just call out like a random child from like down the street.
I had
like just old man Calum.
Good old Mowgli from down the street lived in the woods for a few years. No, but yeah, so it's something that used to be in captivity, then went to the wild, and now is kind of viewed as like again, air quotes, wild animal, but kind of looks like something that could have lived in your house at one point.
Yeah.
So I'd say those are the main ones we're dealing with.
And then just general domestic animals.
Right.
Which are pretty much animals that have been genetically adapted over hundreds of thousands of years to live alongside humans. Yep. Selective breeding plays an aspect. And typically they have some sort of purpose as well, especially in like an agriculture setting.
Yeah, farm animals are a big one. And then a lot of mammalian pets like dogs and cats.
Yeah.
Like most of what we see as dogs and cats wouldn't exist in the wild if we hadn't, put them there, bred them to be the way they are. So I think a good starting point for this conversation, question for you and also for me, but I'm going to say up front, I don't really know. Yeah. Is what do we define as domesticated? Like how long does an animal have to be like a pet
or
for it to be considered domesticated? Or like what qualities do domesticated animals have? I know you've just spoken about it with selective breeding and such, but like I've seen people who have like foxes as pets, or like raccoons, or honestly most reptiles that are in the pet trade. Like, are these domestic or are these just like, what are they?
So
what would we define them as?
I think a big aspect of domestic, besides just the ones that happened over hundreds of thousands of years, so like your dogs, cats, cattle, things like that, where that just kind of happened. And I can go into a little bit of domestication a bit, but in my opinion, I think it's the selective breeding specifically related towards either personality or functionality. So in a previous episode, we talked a lot about captive breeding and breeding animals for color morphs and colorations and things like that. And there's not really, I guess, there's no neurological benefit. So the animal is not being taught or they're choosing one based off of behavior. They're strictly staying externally of the body. And there's no benefit on an agriculture level. Like,
I
sure, you
see.
get people that are raising, like, there's probably at least one person that has, like, a farm of snakes to be sold as
Mm-hmm.
food, or,
An
like,
alligator
turtles,
farm.
alligators as well.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not really changing, like, trying to change how the animal is, like they are with such things as cattle, where they're trying, and like pigs, where they're trying to get them bigger and bulkier, so you get more food per individual.
Yeah. No, that's a good
And
point.
then,
Nobody's really like genetically modifying alligators to
yeah,
be larger to produce more food and like leather and things, as far as I know.
yeah, no, not to my knowledge. But and then going back to what you described, what you said with like specifically raccoons and foxes, a lot of people will like interact with raccoons, and
Hmm.
they're more considered tame, in my opinion, because raccoons have that natural curiosity across the board of, they wonder what things are, and they're trying to find and eat new things. However, with foxes, they are specifically breeding for friendliness traits.
Yeah.
The ones that are less fearful and that are less aggressive, they are typically bred more with each other, trying to keep generations apart in order for them to become pets.
I can agree with that. So I guess to summarize it, it would be like anything that we've been breeding for several generations for changes in like temperament and functionality
Yeah.
and sometimes appearance, I guess, would be more domesticated. But the behavior is a strong aspect, I'd say,
Yeah.
because lots of people breed animals for different colors and patterns and things. But are they domesticated? I don't know if I'd
Yeah.
say that. Um, More just kind of mutants, I guess.
Yeah.
But the other stuff that's not that people keep would be more on the spectrum of like tame or captive.
Yeah.
All right, I'm down for that.
An easy way to describe it is, if I had two ball pythons, one hand raised by people, looks a lot of different colors, and is very friendly towards people, and then I found one. There I am in the wilds of Africa. I found one. I picked it up and I took it with me.
Hmm.
On a genetic level, those snakes are both the same, and while they might not react to me the same way, if I left them both in their own individual tanks under the same conditions, they would act the same exact way. However, if you go into something such as, let's go for a little bit of a weirder example for goats. If I
Hmm.
take a domestic goat and a wild goat and kept them in the same conditions, it would end up differently. Or an even more dramatic example, turkeys. I would
Hmm.
not be able to. I could keep them in the same style cage, but one would thrive in it more than the other, depending on how it's set up.
I see. That makes sense to me.
And if at the end of the day I just say it's a year-long experiment, on day 365 I release them all. For the snakes experiment,
Hmm.
they would both have, while the more colorful tame snake might not have better odds at surviving if it's a color pattern that's not good for the nature,
Hmm.
but if that wasn't a factor, they would be able to serve and fill the same exact role. However, going back to turkeys, it would be dramatically different. The wild turkey would be able to fly, escape predators, and and know where to find food. And the domestic turkey would be able to find food. However, they are made to be so big and bright that they would not be able to do well.
Didn't you mention goats?
I did mention goats at first, but then I changed it to turkeys because I thought they were more drastically different.
I must have missed the turkey switch because when you started talking about turkeys, I was
so with goats, just to throw that in there.
For some reason, I heard it and it was like, and when the goat can fly, like what?
So with the goats as well, like
that all makes sense.
They'll be able to serve same functions, but one is gonna clearly do better than the other.
Yeah. Cool. That makes sense to me. So I guess what else can we mention with this? I mean, like, that's I thought it would be slightly harder to define what domesticated is, because I've thought about it a lot, but I think that pretty well summarizes that.
I've had to give this explanation a lot of times over my years as an animal educator.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes is a fun conversation, but you get to a point where it's just like you either really grasp it or you really don't grasp this point that I'm trying to make.
Yeah, that's fair. Another question I pose for you then.
Okay.
Because I guess this is what we're doing now. I'm just asking you questions. Would be, can everything be tamed? Like,
okay,
there are certain animals that we think are tameable. I guess when I mentioned this, I would say taken from the wild and somewhat trained, or just kind of convinced that humans are cool and don't need to be defensive against them. Because we've done that with dogs and cats and pretty much any domestic animal to a certain degree. And there are a lot of other pets that maybe are not domesticated, or, using that term, but are much more like
surprise
fine cat. There you go. Perfect example. They're much more okay with like being handled than their wild counterparts would be.
I would say, in theory, yes. Every animal has the ability to be tame
to a certain degree.
To a certain degree with humans. However, there are some examples of it clearly not likely going to happen.
Yeah.
For example, captive insects. Insects are, on the intelligence scale, they are a certain level and are a lot smarter than people give them credit for. But their interactions with humans are typically either scarce or they are instinctively into survival mode because of it's just such a dramatic size differential.
And I want to make a side note really quick that a future episode will definitely be on intelligence in animals, because that's a subject that I find fascinating. It's so much fun to talk about. But as you're saying.
So, hold on, I was just writing down that onto the list.
Good idea.
And I spelt intelligence wrong. Nice.
There's so much comedy in that, but go on.
So, with the captive insects, I think it's more of your good old nature versus nurture and kind of argument, and it's going to be straight up nature. They're not. They have the ability to react positively or not caringly odds are they're gonna treat you like any other threat that their colony or individual knows.
Yeah. Because my thoughts on that specific subject are like, I've worked with quite a few invertebrates before, so I'm thinking like tarantulas.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like there are some tarantulas you can work with
That are
really calm,
calm, yeah.
and like you can just pick them up and they're totally fine. They'll walk around, no problem. And there are some tarantulas that you just don't open the tank
Mm-hmm.
because they will
If
defend
you
themselves.
if you think about them funny, they will
Yeah,
attack or
they're gonna try to bite you or send their hairs at you.
which
Um,
is not a fun process.
no, not at all. Um, but I think sometimes when it comes to that, I find it hard to be able to differentiate for myself whether this is something on an individual basis, like or even like a species kind of thing, where it's like certain species we know are just more aggressive than others. So like a rose-haired tarantula
Mm-hmm.
is not going to respond to a human interaction the same way as like a Goliath bird eater,
Yeah.
where like on one end, the rose-haired tarantula, very common pet, um, for the most part, are just really like they don't care about anything. Like you can just pick them up and they're like whatever. While a Goliath bird eater is gonna bite you as
Mm-hmm.
soon as it sees you. Like, um, and I am generalizing here, but it makes me wonder. Like, so I mean, this is a whole other topic: is animal behavior
Yeah.
and like animal personalities. Like, are some individuals just generally calmer than others? Or is it
Mm-hmm.
like they've learned to be more calm because they realize like, oh, this thing that picks me up every once in a while isn't actually a threat, so I don't need to expend the
Yeah.
energy to put on a defensive display or
Mm-hmm.
anything like that.
I think that's
Um,
a good way to describe it.
it gets super complicated,
Mm-hmm.
but like the reason I brought up this subject is a phrase that I'm sure you've heard as much as I have, where you see in the news occasionally somebody has some exotic pet
Mm-hmm.
and things go awry, whether it be like a chimpanzee or a tiger or
Yep.
something goes bad, and people will make the argument where it's like, well, it's a wild animal. Like even though you keep it in your house, it's a
Yeah.
wild animal.
A duh.
Um, and it makes me think, and it's like, well, couldn't you say that about anything that isn't a
Mm-hmm.
domesticated animal?
Yeah.
And even still, domesticated animals, like how many dog attacks are there each year around the world?
A lot more than shark attacks, especially
Exactly.
captive
Yeah.
sharks.
Exactly. So it's like that statement has always
Mm-hmm.
kind of stuck out to me because it's like, so you're saying that some animals are just inherently more
Aggressive.
wild than others,
Yeah.
or more aggressive, or harder to tame, or unable to be tamed? And it's like it really confused me for a while, but I think the best way that I've found to explain it is like I mentioned earlier,
Mm-hmm.
where I think pretty much anything can be tamed
Yeah.
to a degree, but it's just that degree isn't as obvious as most people would think. Most people, I feel like when they hear tame, they're like their dog. Like you
Their
can
dog, or
teach it to not bite people
like
and
seals.
yeah, and like you can sit and roll over and you
Mm-hmm.
give them food and they'll never cause a problem for you. But that's not really
That's not.
what it means, is it? It's
So,
like they
yeah.
don't respond as they would in the wild,
Mm-hmm.
um, regularly, right?
Mm-hmm. So,
That's
as
how I would
someone
view it.
with a actually a decent amount of animal training
Yeah,
experience, uh, first off, surprisingly, dogs is one I've taken classes for, but I've not trained my own dog yet, or a dog on my own yet.
that's true. I was gonna say
But
Kevin
I've
has a wild dog
no,
running around his apartment.
but I have trained cats, monitors, parrots. I've even more or less station trained frogs and skinks as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got quite a variety of different animals, and with taming, there's taming so they're calm. Like for instance, with pythons, I can reach in there, grab my python, and she is so tame she won't attack negatively. However, that's not true for every python. Just like
Mm-hmm.
how pet I can pet my one cat, no problem. But if I try to rub my other cat's belly like I do for the first cat, I will lose my hand. And when it comes to the stereotypical term training
Mm-hmm.
for like dogs and stuff like that, I think that's more of a teaching behaviors thing
Yeah.
where it can be considered taming in a different sense of the word,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't have you don't require to have a tame animal in order for it to be teachable.
Right.
However, most having animals that you teach and work with do tend to be more tame because of the amount of dedication and time you have to put into teaching them behaviors.
Mm-hmm. And I
So,
want to avoid the topic of intelligence for now, even though I know I mentioned it
yeah,
earlier, but it's for a future episode,
that's a
definitely.
feature.
Because I think people would make the argument that it depends on the intelligence of the animal, how tameable they are. Um, I guess tameable and trainable are slightly,
They're slightly
uh,
different.
yeah, they're slightly different. We're kind of mixing them and matching them, but I think the point gets across where it's like some people would say that certain animals are smarter than others, and that shows how tameable they are. But I don't think it really is like that kind of correlation. I don't
I
think
don't
they
think
relate
so
as
either.
much as people would say. And you can also say that, like, well, you can pick up your pet ball python and it's fine,
Mm-hmm.
but like, I can't pick up, or I can pick up like some wild snakes. Like,
And
if I
it'll be
pick up a
fine.
wild garter snake, yeah, like
Mm-hmm.
it'll be fine. Or sometimes it's not fine and they bite me a lot.
Yeah,
Um, but
I've
then
been
again,
there for some of those.
I think again that gets into like the individuality
Mm-hmm.
of animals, and it's like, well,
Yeah.
some just react differently.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many different factors that go into it, where
Yeah.
it's like you never know exactly how they're going to respond. A lot of times, it is um, like known what an animal's like specific defense behaviors
Yeah.
are. Like it's documented what certain animals will do as a defense,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not guaranteed all the
No.
time.
Like
But
my
what we're saying,
example of
yeah,
my two cats. If I wanted to pet
hmm
both their bellies, it's a it's a 50-50 shot. One enjoys it, the other hates it. So
hmm
we'll go into a defensive mentality, despite being both being domestic, both being pretty much treated the exact same. But it's just the individual basis of it, and
yeah,
the the argument of kind of going back a little bit, and we'll, not very deep, but the argument of trainability equals intelligence is not true because trainability is more or measure of intelligence of behaviors that people want them to do.
hmm
So my one cat, who's very good at being a cat, she doesn't like her belly rubbed. I haven't taught her any sort of behaviors, and she knows exactly, mostly exactly how like what to do to get someone's attention, what to do to, like, if she sees like a cricket on the floor, she's very aware of what's going on. And then my other cat, Princess Bean, who I've station trained her, I've crate trained her, I've trained her to go through tunnels. She's not bright. She regularly bites her tail and gets surprised when it hurts her. It's a couple weeks after Christmas, and she just realized that the Christmas decorations were gone today. I think she was very thoroughly investigating where we had a bunch of Christmas decorations earlier.
Wow.
So I think the term intelligence and trainability should be kept separate.
I mean, Bean is a treasure. Let's just all agree
She's
on
a
that.
national treasure, yeah.
But yeah, with our definitions, I think when it comes to tame, it's not really like, this will be your perfect pet. It's more that this animal, like, does not typically respond in the same way that it would in the wild. Something is different about it in the way that it interacts. And a lot of times we can control that. So an example I'm thinking of is with like big cats, because we've been talking about cats a lot.
Yeah.
So people will say if somebody has a pet tiger and one day it bites them, and hopefully it doesn't kill them, but sometimes it happens. They say, well, tigers are just wild animals, so obviously that's going to happen.
Yeah.
But like to a point, right? Because the ones that we're talking about here are not as wild as one you would actually find out in the wild, because they're doing tricks or they're trained to eat a certain way, go to the bathroom a certain way. Like even ones in zoos where, for the most part, the good zoos typically try to keep animals to display their natural behaviors.
Yeah.
But like, go on.
Like this kind of leads into a lot of things such as target training.
Yeah.
Where, going back to what I said, it takes a lot of time and effort and to be able to teach the animals this. So they do naturally become more tame because they're also becoming more used to you. Because if an animal was terrified of you and you wanted to try and train it, it's not going to work out that well. So you got to spend a lot of time getting the animal to trust you first.
Yep, exactly. So although they may still exhibit a lot of wild behaviors, they're tame to an extent in that, like, we can show them where the food comes from and when to go into their, like, side enclosure when stuff needs to be cleaned or something like that. A wild tiger wouldn't do that.
No.
Maybe if you take the time to try and train a wild tiger to do that, it would. And then that gets into intelligence and behavior and stuff. But
that's a different episode.
For me, that is what tame is the ability for an animal to react in a way that it wouldn't naturally do due to human interaction. That's the best way I can put it to words.
I can agree to it. Now let's go into feral a little bit.
Sure.
Dive in.
I like feral stuff.
So yeah, feral animals, I feel like they're by far the most blurred lines that we have.
Yeah. For sure. And we mentioned this in our cat episode as well.
But there is a lot more than just cats. Cats is a very primarily example, but there's a lot more.
Yeah.
Because it's anything that was once domesticated.
Yeah. So we've got cats and dogs. Depending on where you are, I think, like in the world, it's much more obvious what feral things are.
Yeah.
But I think like where we live, you never see a feral dog, do you?
No, not really. It's the barn cats.
Yeah, you get the feral cats pretty regularly. Like there's a park near us that has like At least it used to.
Mm-hmm.
When I would walk around, it had like a troop of feral cats.
It's actually a clouder, by the way, a group of cats.
Is that what it is? A clouder
Mm-hmm.
of cats?
Yep.
Fun facts with Kevin. I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a pride.
No, it's just
Is that
lines.
specifically for lions?
Yeah.
Wow. Very interesting. Um, yeah, so like we have like cats, but in other parts of the world, I know when I went to like um, Costa Rica as well as places in the Caribbean,
Mm-hmm.
like Aruba, it was much more common to see dogs just kind of like wandering.
Walking the streets.
Yeah, like we had a dog when we went to Costa Rica.
We did.
Uh, in the last place we stayed, that just kind of chilled with us.
Mm-hmm. When we pulled that
That
all-nighter before traveling.
yeah, yeah, we just hung out with that dog for like a few
Hours.
days. Or yeah, hours. I don't know. All that
Mm-hmm.
all that time blurred together. Good times. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but you also get things like feral hogs.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody's hanging out with feral hogs.
No.
And they're a
No.
huge problem. Oh my god.
Huge problem.
Destroying so much habitat. And this is also getting to invasive species stuff. But I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what feral animals are, aren't
Yeah,
they?
they're so with ferals. There's a difference between like an escaped domestic animal, an escaped wild animal, and a feral animal.
Yeah.
Let's say New York City, a very populated area that people around the globe know. If you
Mm-hmm.
have an escaped cat, like someone's house cat got out, which probably happens all the time up there, it has the ability to become feral, but it doesn't have to be. And
Yeah.
then you get something like an escaped, say, elephant. If an
Mm.
escaped elephant gets out, it doesn't have an opportunity to be feral because it was never domesticated in the first place.
True.
And then
'Cause-
you get the street cats that are born and raised in the alleys, like your stereotypical cartoon cat,
yep.
and those are feral because in their genes, they were domestic, but now they were never treated like they were.
Mm-hmm. And that also sets them apart from other invasive species like red-eared sliders and Burmese pythons that are like they were pets,
Mm-hmm.
but to call them domesticated is
Wrong.
yeah, it's just like not quite accurate.
Yeah, they were
So
pets that were let go, as
yeah,
opposed to pets. They were let go and not domestic. And if they
yeah.
were,
I mean that's like the
yeah,
best way to put it. Really, is like feral. I think pretty much something can only be considered feral if it was initially
mm-hmm.
domesticated. At least for my definition. Let me know
Yeah,
if that's wrong.
that's
Um,
no, that's pretty much every definition I've found is it has to be a domesticated species.
all right, cool. So yeah, so a lot of invasive species don't fit that bill, but anything like actually, you know what a good example of this is? A land of feral animals would be Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Hawaii has a ton of like pigs,
Yep.
goats, chickens
Yep.
that are just running free across the land that nobody like owns anymore. But at some point they were brought over there. But now they're just like wandering the wilderness of Hawaii and really messing stuff up too.
Mm-hmm. And I think a big aspect of that is people technically, I mean, they have to be involved to have the animal in
Right.
order to domesticate it, but people, in theory, don't have to be involved with the feralization process.
Yeah.
Because an animal can escape on its own, as well as a very big opportunity for animals to be left behind or escape is during natural disasters.
Oh yeah, it's a big one. for sure.
they so if there's a natural disaster, let's say Kansas, where they have twisters, I believe, if I
In
yeah.
their native tongue, yeah.
No, it's more. I'm pretty sure there's twisters in Kansas. Isn't that the plot to Wizard of Oz?
That's
Um,
definitely the plot, yeah.
they tear down so many fences and cages and stuff that if all the animals could get out, and if they don't collect them all back, the ones that are still escaped or set free by Mother Nature have the ability to become feral.
Yeah. And that also is a part of it, is like if they are let out and just immediately die, then they're not really feral.
Yeah, they're just.
No, they never had the chance. They're just like kind of pets or
They're
captive
domestic.
animals that then died. Yeah, unfortunately. But yeah, I mean, it happens all too often and around the world. And I think people don't really look at feral animals. I mean, like I said, it has a negative connotation to it. But I feel like people don't really look at them as closely as like we kind of need to.
Yeah.
Like they view them as like, oh, that's kind of sad. This poor dog lives in the wild on its own. Like somebody should rescue it and rehome it, and maybe the dodo will make a video about it on Facebook. But like, yeah, like they are invasive species, right?
Yeah.
Sorry, did that catch you off guard?
That got me.
But like they are an invasive species.
Yeah.
And again, it's not their fault, right? It's not really any animal's fault for being an invasive species, but a lot of them cause a really big problem in the environments that they live in. And just because we view them in the same light as we view the animals in our own homes
does not mean that they should be treated the same way. And this is kind of going back to our cats and our invasive species first episodes of each.
Definitely, yeah.
And
because it's the same idea.
Yeah, it's the same idea. And the animals that are displaced, they are taking over niches for like native animals, so that's causing them to become more and more invasive. And they can cause a problem despite being like an everyday pet. And the fact that they're an everyday, it's like a common everyday pet, everyone feels obligated to take care of it. I get a lot of people I talk to that ask what food is best for like feral cats, and I just go, I would desperately want to say none, but I'm not a cruel person, so I'll just go the cheapest one.
Like you want to say don't feed feral animals,
but
maybe,
I have,
but like,
like I have denied people that are, or be like, I'm gonna get this and set it free, and I just go, no, you're not.
Nope.
Shut this
down.
Wait,
hold on. Wait. I feel like we have to talk about that point. Who's buying things from pet stores and setting them free?
So actually, goldfish. Goldfish happen all the time. People buy goldfish for like carnival events and stuff like that, and if the fish doesn't sell or get one, they'll just release them into local streams. It's a very common thing, actually.
But it's not Free Willy.
It's not Free
Willy.
Goldfish. It's goldfish, and people will set them free.
Oh my god.
Then that's for invasive species part 2 or 3.
Yeah. But I mean, oh my god. I don't think people realize how big goldfish get.
That's exactly
you give
it.
them enough space. Because wow. Yeah, I mean, I know it happens because I've seen so many like random koi fish in some pond, like wherever, and it's like, how on earth did you get here?
People will not realize that how big they get, or another common thing is a kid will unintentionally win it or get it. And of course the kid will throw a fit about immediately flushing it. So the parents will be like, "We'll release it into the stream or pond so you can visit it."
Mm.
And they'll visit it twice and never see it again.
Jeez. Yeah, it's upsetting. Slightly off topic, but still,
Yeah.
I mean, still kind of, feral goldfish.
Which is a
Ever
weird.
said that.
It's such a weird statement, but
Not
yeah,
completely
it's
inaccurate.
feral carp because goldfish are technically carp.
Yeah.
Are actually a very big thing.
That's true.
All right. So we talked a little bit about tame. We talked a little bit about feral.
Right.
And then let's. So, do you want to talk about domestic a little bit more in detail?
Yeah, we can.
Kind of, because we can only talk so much about wild animals as like
That's true.
the concept of a wild animal.
Yeah.
Let me summarize it. It's an animal that doesn't interact with humans and lives on its own with no human, mostly no human influence or very minor.
Yeah. There's really not much you can say about them. I mean, there's plenty of stuff you can say about wild animals in general, but like to try to like explain what a wild animal is, which is kind of the point of the episode.
Yeah,
like
the concept of wild animals is not very explainable, or it's very easily explainable.
Yeah, it's not a hard concept to grasp, is it? Like everybody knows, right? It's not like a tough thing to decipher. Although I guess it's tougher in that like people confuse wild animals with something that's more tame or feral or domesticated, right? Like like when we talked about in our cat episode of people being like, cats are wild animals, need to let them outside, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It gets confusing, but like in general, people know what wild animals are. Yeah, we can talk about captive and domestic a bit more. Do you have anything in mind specifically?
So I actually took a class that was talking about specifically with dogs. It was canine behavior training and behavior. Yeah.
Gotcha.
And we went over the domestication of dog because we started kind of like in the beginning.
In the beginning, there was a dog.
Yep. And domestication sometimes just happens. There are fossil records of dogs interacting with people from thousands of years ago in places such as Central America, in places as in Southeast Asia, even Africa. And these are not close places.
Oh.
Especially before they invented cars and planes and trains. You had to walk everywhere or take a cart. But it pretty directly relates to like wild dogs were closely hanging out near camps for people because they wouldn't eat all the meat from the food, so the dogs would either be given it or be able to sneak in and steal some food, kind of like scavengers, because the best meal is a free meal. So that happened, and then at some point, still once again thousands upon thousands of years ago, there was a correlation between, I guess, in like semi-ancient documentation through paintings and stuff, there were shown dogs hunting with people, whether it be unintentional, like the dog would accidentally flush out what the humans were hunting, or whether it be strategic. And that's kind of what happened a little bit with like dogs and cats, whereas they kind of learned how to work with humans in a symbiotic relationship, which led to it happening over thousands of years to become domestic. And then
That's such a fascinating thing,
it's
isn't it? It's like
the most
different
fascinating
species.
part about it is the fact that it happened in at least three dramatically different places, all
Yeah,
around roughly the same time, where it jumps around on where the first case happened because it goes based off of the oldest fossil record.
well, I mean that's probably just aliens, right?
I mean, it could be aliens. Don't know that for a fact.
But just like
Mm-hmm.
the interaction of different species to like work towards the same goal.
Mm-hmm.
Like at some point, something just made the decision of like, see that thing that
Yeah.
is not me or anything like me. I'm gonna interact with that,
I'm gonna help
and
it.
like obviously humans took it to the extreme
Mm-hmm.
with dogs and cats and other domesticated animals. Although some domesticated animals obviously didn't have the same kind of interaction. It was just kind of like for farm animals and things, we
Mm-hmm.
just kind of took them and we're like, we're going to feed you and you will provide for us. And they're like, well,
Yeah.
what am I going to do about it?
So, I mean, that is that's also something that's kind of like based off of the relationship, because people would corral livestock and feed them to get them fatter for specifically winter and be able to have more meat. And the animals benefited from it because they got fed free food and they had
Yeah.
protection. So, kind of like how with the dogs being domestic, they got the free food and they kind of helped hunt, so they got more free food. And I guess they were kind of also on a production detail a little bit too, because they would, for any other predators that would be in the area, they would help defend their source of food, which would be people.
Mm-hmm.
The livestock is protected because they're kept safe, and they get fed all like free food and taken care of, so they don't have to worry about those survival instincts that they needed, because somebody is basically handing them everything they need.
Yeah. And, now we talk about the animal welfare positives and negatives of farming.
Okay,
Just
yeah,
kidding.
I
We're
was
not
just
going to
saying,
do
you want me to get into that one, because
no, no,
I can get into animal welfare.
no, no, no. But I mean, that will be a topic.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, that's just like, it is fascinating to see that symbiotic relationship, and then
Mm-hmm.
arguably, does it continue to be a symbiotic relationship? I mean,
I
kind of.
think most of the time it does, but the roles of it change pretty dramatically,
Yeah.
because you get, like, let's keep with dogs for example.
Sure.
We still provide them with food, and occasionally they'll help with hunting or protection, but that's not always required.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just it's a dog is a companion. Like Daisy, I'm assuming doesn't help with guarding the house or
Daisy.
um,
No, not in the
hunting.
slightest. Sometimes she'll see a squirrel in the backyard and she'll do a little hunting dog pose.
Mm-hmm.
But she is a chubby little beast.
Yeah,
Um, she's never successfully caught anything. But yeah,
exactly.
no,
So,
no, so the only benefit Daisy's providing is increase to my mental health.
which by thousands of years ago standards, and I guess possibly a little bit on the like interspecies relationship scale, would
Mm-hmm.
be considered more on the parasitic side, because she benefits and you lose money for trying to feed her.
True, but totally worth it. Because wow, what a cutie.
She's a keeper though.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, very interesting stuff. I always like seeing different species interact with each other. Because it's like to figure out how that initially happened. What was that turning point? It's just like crazy.
And then you get the weird animal friendships videos on YouTube.
God, I love those.
It's just like, what?
The tortoise and the pig are like friends, and it's like, why? Why are you doing this?
But yeah. So let's start our little take-home fact. I guess tip of the day section. If you have a better name, tweet it at us at Castpod Tweeter.
Yeah, I want a name for this thing. Because it's our only like consistent thing, other than I guess the intro.
Yeah.
Even that I mess up, but whatever.
I'd say somewhat forgiven.
Yeah. I'd say my take-home fact or message, when it comes to our whole conversation about captive and wild and tame and whatnot, is probably along the lines of back to kind of our tame conversation, is that there will always be instincts in animals. There's always going to be those kind of behaviors that are never going to change. So no matter how tame you think something is, how domesticated you think something is,
it still
always
will
know
have.
It has its animal tendencies, you know. Like never fully put your faith into the animal that you're working closely with.
Yeah.
Because
no animal is 100% safe.
Exactly. I've been working with animals for years in the wild and in captivity, and I treat them all the same, you know, with the same level of respect, because you never know how they're going to react. Yeah. No, like, you know, you never know. You really never know. You can have things that are like straight up pets and things that are as wild as can be, and you have no idea how they're actually going to react. You can never completely predict it, so just like be aware. And I guess that's slightly more for like people that work with animals, but I think it relates to.
I think that works in general, because a lot of people have dogs and cats as pets, and animals might behave well to them specifically, but not to other individuals.
Yeah, so like, don't be surprised if they one day bite somebody or scratch them, or if you open the door and they just make a break for it.
Yeah.
Like,
looking at you,
just
Bean.
always be aware.
Bean tried that once.
Little scamp.
Yeah, she's adorable, so we love her.
True.
So my take-home fact would be on the lines of tameability, or the tameness of an animal does not directly equal intelligence.
That's a good one.
So we talked a decent bit about it. We didn't go too into it because I think we're going to make it a different episode.
Yeah.
But it's a very misleading factor in animals, because sometimes they're so smart that they'll learn and do everything you want them to do, or they're just so apathetic that they don't care what you do around them. They'll just loaf.
Yeah, just choose to ignore you. And also, our definition of intelligence is weird, which is what we'll talk about.
Yeah, we'll talk about that at a feature in the intelligence episode. All right, Calum, take us home.
Thank you, everybody, so much for listening. We appreciate you taking the time to hear what we have to say, whether it is right or wrong. Hopefully it's right. But as always, contact us through YouTube comments, Castpod Tweeter, as well as email or any other way you find us.
And let us know. Smoke signals.
That's true. I can't read them, but I'll look at them for sure.
I mean, I can't read regular things, so there's the bar.
That's fair. But yeah, always let us know if you have anything to say about what we said, whether it was wrong, whether it was right, whether you want us to talk about it more, or you want us to talk about something else.
Mm-hmm. We're always
Please.
open to suggestions.
Yes, keep in touch with us, and we will continue to speak at you. And until next time, bye.
Bye.